Sarah stepped off the bus, her gaze fixed on the drab 4-story apartment building that loomed before her like a concrete memory. At the entrance she faltered, a wave of apprehension washing over her, making her feet feel like lead. She sank onto the nearest park bench, the cool metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat rising within her. 5 years. 5 years since she had last stood on this very spot. The realization of the time that had passed hit her with the force of a physical blow. The first step across that threshold felt impossibly heavy after all this time. Her mother Eleanor and her daughter Lily waited inside. The thought was a fragile comfort against the rising tide of anxiety. How would this reunion unfold? Lily would be in school now, no longer the little girl she remembered. Eleanor would be navigating the quiet landscape of retirement. No, Sarah hadn't abandoned them willingly. Life, in its cruel and unpredictable way, had intervened. 5 years ago, Sarah was sentenced for fraud and grand larceny, and on this very day Sarah walked out of prison gates. The label thief felt alien and unfair, yet she had borne its weight, paying the price for a crime that wasn't truly hers. It had all begun so beautifully. 10 years prior, Sarah had graduated at the top of her economics class, full of hope and promise. That same year she had married Ethan, the most wonderful man she had ever known. Even then Ethan was on solid ground, having built a successful business with his close friend. They had started young, right after graduation from college, gradually establishing a thriving company. And when Ethan married Sarah, he had it all. A sprawling house in the suburbs, a chic downtown condo, a sleek car, and a healthy bank account. But Sarah hadn't loved him for any of that. Her love for Ethan was pure, recognizing in him a soulmate. And Ethan hadn't cared that Sarah possessed little in the way of material wealth or influential family, just her mother, a kind librarian, and a small modest apartment. None of that mattered. Their love for each other was the foundation of everything. A year later, their precious daughter, Lily, arrived, their greatest joy. Ethan worked with renewed vigour, wanting to give his wife and daughter the very best life had to offer. Sarah would sometimes chide him, reminding him that money wasn't everything. But Ethan would simply laugh, his eyes full of love. When Lily was older and Sarah expressed a desire to return to work, Ethan initially resisted. His wife wouldn't need to work. Why should she? Her role was to bring him joy and save a life. However, Sarah eventually persuaded him, and soon she became the head accountant at his company, working alongside him and his friend. Randall, Ethan's business partner, had been agreeable to the arrangement. At that time, Sarah believed that Ethan and Randall would lay down their lives for each other. They shared an unbreakable bond of trust, celebrating every milestone together. Randall, still a bachelor, often joked that Ethan had landed an angel for a wife. Sarah had enjoyed the compliment, and Ethan would beam, his eyes filled with adoration. Yes, Sarah was his miracle. Then the unthinkable happened. One early morning, Ethan's car skidded on a treacherous patch of ice. It was early spring, and a sudden freeze had coated the roads. He was returning to the city from a business trip. In a split second, the car veered out of his control, hurtling into oncoming traffic. Ethan died instantly. The funeral, the wake. Sarah moved through it all in a fog. Her actions automatic, her heart numb. Only little Lily, with her innocent grief, kept Sarah from completely unravelling. Lily was just 4 years old then. She couldn't grasp the finality of her father's absence. They hadn't taken her to the funeral, wanting to shield her young mind from the harsh reality. So, how could Papa suddenly be in the sky? Why hadn't he told her he was going? Lily didn't understand, and her small heart ached for her father. Sarah comforted her daughter as best she could. Thankfully, her mother Eleanor was a constant presence, a steady anchor for Lily. Slowly, it seemed, the little girl began to find some semblance of peace. Randall, too, became a frequent visitor to their home. He brought Lily toys, spent time playing with her, his presence a quiet form of support. Then one day he looked directly at Sarah and told her that he wanted her and Lily to become his family. Randall had harboured a secret affection for Sarah, a quiet yearning that had grown in the shadow of Ethan's vibrant presence. Ethan's death had seemingly cleared a path, and Randall, mistaking Sarah's grief for vulnerability, saw his chance. Sarah, still reeling from her loss, was taken aback by his declaration, the words hanging heavy in the air. She tried to let him down gently, explaining that her heart still belonged to Ethan, that she couldn't imagine a future with anyone else. "But Ethan isn't coming back, Sarah," Randall had pointed out, his voice low and insistent. "Are you going to mourn him for the rest of your life?" "Perhaps," Sarah replied, her cool tone, a sudden unpleasantness settling over her whenever she was around Randall. There was a possessiveness in his gaze that made her skin crawl, but they worked together, and Sarah, ever the professional, didn't want to create unnecessary conflict. Besides, the power dynamics had subtly shifted. While she was the rightful heir of her husband, Randall held the reins according to all papers. Then came the company party, a boisterous celebration of a successful deal. Sarah had no desire to participate in the forced merriment, so while the others gathered in the conference room, she stayed in her office, trying to focus on overdue reports. The door creaked open and Randall stepped in, closing and locking it behind him. He moved towards Sarah, his breath heavy with the scent of alcohol. "My sweet Sarah," he slurred, his eyes too bright. "Why are you hiding away here? Come, join me." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip surprisingly strong, and yanked her from her chair, pulling her against his chest. The suddenness of his actions left Sarah momentarily stunned, her mind blank with disbelief. Then the instinct to resist surged through her. She struggled, trying to break free from his unwanted embrace, and she did. Sarah stumbled back, putting distance between them, her heart pounding. Randall followed, a drunken smirk twisting his features. "Don't touch me!" Sarah cried, her voice trembling with anger and disgust. "You sicken me, Randall! You're an animal!" Her words seemed to hit a nerve. Randall stopped, his smirk fading into a dark scowl. "Sickening, am I? Fine, Sarah. You'll regret this," he hissed, his eyes promising retribution. He stepped away from the door, unlocked the office, and left. The silence he left behind, thick with unspoken threat. Sarah tried to convince herself that the incident was over, a drunken misstep best forgotten. In the following days, she and Randall maintained a strained professional facade, their interactions strictly business. Everything seemed normal on the surface, except Randall no longer stopped by her house to see Lily. Then, like a bolt from the blue, the police and tax investigators descended upon the office. Sarah was bewildered, unable to comprehend how she had suddenly become the central figure in a criminal investigation. She was accused of large-scale embezzlement. Financial irregularities had surfaced, implicating their company in money laundering schemes, with funds allegedly being funneled through shell corporations. And everywhere her electronic signature was the damning evidence. Sarah vehemently denied any involvement, her mind racing, trying to understand how such a thing could have happened without her knowledge. But no one believed her. She desperately wanted to hire a competent lawyer, but all her and Ethan's accounts and assets were frozen. She and Lily were forced to move in with her mother. The trial was a blur, a Kafkaesque nightmare where everyone seemed to see a clear guilt that Sarah herself couldn't fathom, and Randall Randall was a star witness for the prosecution, his testimony damning. He painted Sarah as greedy and manipulative, even suggesting that Ethan had made a grave error in ever marrying her, implying that Ethan would be ashamed of her now. Sarah watched him, her heart a cold knot of disbelief. This man who had shared so many years with their family was now intentionally destroying her life. In the courtroom, he was a harsh and venomous stranger. Yes, Sarah had insisted that Randall was the one behind the fraud, but the court believed Randall's carefully constructed lies. Sarah was convicted and sentenced to 5 long years. 5 agonizing years. In that time, her little Lily had grown into a schoolgirl, her milestones marked only by the photographs Eleanor brought during visits. Sarah had asked her mother not to bring Lily to the prison. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter seeing her behind bars. In fact, she desperately didn't want Lily to know her mother was incarcerated at all. But, well-meaning if misguided, people had talked. During one visit, Eleanor confessed that other children were teasing Lily, calling her the jailbird's daughter. The words were a knife to Sarah's heart, a pain she was powerless to alleviate. And those kind people were, in their own way, right. But Sarah clung to the hope that upon her release she would find the strength to prove her innocence, to show everyone that she had been unjustly condemned. Her main concern now was for Eleanor, that her mother wouldn't break under the strain of it all. Eleanor was a tower of quiet strength. During her visits to Sarah she would offer words of comfort, a steady presence for her daughter. But the moment she left the visiting room, a wave of despair would wash over her, tears silently tracing paths down her weathered cheeks on the long bus ride home. There were so many burdens she kept hidden, a silent shield protecting her daughter. The truth was, the family finances had been decimated. Ethan's assets were frozen, entangled in the legal aftermath, and Eleanor's meagre pension, supplemented by Lily's survivor benefits, barely covered their mounting expenses. Eleanor's heart medication was a constant drain, and a necessary surgery loomed she couldn't afford. The woman kept her worries to herself, a silent pact with her fear, not wanting to add to the darkness that had already consumed Sarah. She had seen her daughter grow gaunt within those prison walls, a vibrant woman fading into a mere shadow of her former self, her eyes haunted by unspoken thoughts. Then the day Eleanor had longed for finally arrived. Her daughter was being released. Sarah, in an act of protectiveness, hadn't told her mother the exact date, wanting to spare Eleanor the anticipation and potential anxiety. And now, here she was, standing near the entrance of their old apartment building, her heart aflutter with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Sarah sat hunched on the bench, a prisoner of her own anxieties. Each passing moment felt like an eternity. How would Lily truly react? Her little girl was growing up, becoming aware of the world's harsh judgments. Would she see her mother as damaged, someone to be ashamed of? Suddenly a bright, innocent voice cut through Sarah's dark thoughts. "Grandma, the whole class is going to the museum next weekend," Lily exclaimed, her youthful enthusiasm a stark contrast to Sarah's inner turmoil. "The teacher said, if I'm going, the money needs to be paid by Friday." "Yes, my darling, of course you'll go," Eleanor replied, her voice soft with affection. "Let's go upstairs, and I'll ask Mrs. Henderson from apartment 3 if she can lend us a little more until my pension cheque arrives." Sarah's breath caught. That voice so familiar, so loved. It was her mother, and beside her, Lily. Sarah rose abruptly, turning just as their eyes met. Mother and daughter, separated by years and circumstance, finally face to face. "Mummy?" Lily whispered, her small face a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. Her eyes, wide and questioning, searched Sarah's. She took a hesitant step forward, her worn sneaker catching on the uneven pavement. She stumbled, almost falling. Instantly, Sarah was on her knees, her arms wrapping around her daughter, pulling her close. Tears, pent up for so long, finally broke free, sobs racking her body. "Lily, oh Lily, my sweet girl," she murmured, stroking Lily's hair, the child's small face pressed against her shoulder. Sarah longed to shower her with kisses, but the fear of the imagined scent of the prison clinging to her held her back. "Mummy!" Lily finally cried out, pulling back slightly and reaching up to touch Sarah's face, then leaning in to press a tentative kiss to her temple. "Mummy, you're finally home! I've waited so long!" Lily knew her mother. Eleanor had kept Sarah's picture close, a constant presence in Lily's young life, a face she had talked to, sharing her joys and sorrows. Sarah lifted her tear-filled eyes, a watery smile gracing her lips, as she looked at Eleanor, who stood nearby, her own eyes brimming, allowing this sacred reunion to unfold. "I'm finally at home, Mum," Sarah managed, her voice thick with emotion. "My darling girl, thank heavens. Everything will be all right now," Eleanor breathed, her relief palpable. Now it was her turn to embrace her daughter, holding her tight before they turned towards the building. Unseen by them, a stout young woman, Mrs. Henderson, watched their arrival from her ground-floor window. As soon as Sarah, Lily, and Eleanor disappeared, she snatched her phone. "You won't believe who just showed up," she hissed into the phone, her voice laced with indignation. "That ex-con! I don't know how we're going to live now. It's not enough she's probably brought all sorts of germs back from that hellhole. She'll start stealing again, mark my words, it's in her blood. Used to be big stuff, now it'll be petty things. Everyone's got to eat." Mrs. Henderson didn't seem to care that her judgmental words carried clearly into the stairwell, where Sarah, Eleanor, and Lily were just passing. The cruel words landed like a physical blow, but all three of them, even Lily, pretended not to hear. Inside their small apartment, the first thing Sarah did was draw a hot bath, the steaming water a promise of cleansing that she had yearned for. Later, wrapped in a soft robe, she sat in the kitchen, drinking tea with her little family. Lily stayed close, her small hand occasionally stroking Sarah's arm, as if testing her reality, afraid she might disappear again. They talked for hours, a gentle stream of everyday details, the deeper unspoken emotions hovering in the quiet spaces between their words. Later, Sarah helped Lily with her homework, and when her daughter finally drifted off to sleep, she returned to the stillness of the kitchen. "Mum, does Lily need money for school?" Sarah asked Eleanor, her gaze soft with concern. "Don't you worry your head about that, honey. I'll figure it out. Going to see Mrs. Henderson tomorrow," Eleanor replied, her voice a little too casual. "You borrow from her often?" Sarah's brow furrowed. Eleanor sighed. "Well, I have to. What choice do I have?" "She charges interest?" Sarah's tone sharpened with disbelief. "Just a little, 3% of the amount for the month." Eleanor avoided her daughter's eyes. "A loan shark?" Sarah scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "And she works at the Department of Housing, I think you said?" "Something like that. Now, you just rest, sweetheart. Take it easy. Get used to being home again." Eleanor patted Sarah's hand, her own trembling slightly. Sarah let out a heavy breath. "Yeah, it's going to be a half-life, that's for sure." She walked into the small bedroom she would now share with Lily, her eyes taking in the familiar surroundings. Lily was asleep on the twin bed, tucked into the corner, her schoolbooks stacked neatly on the small desk beside it. Sarah's daybed and armchair sat against the opposite wall. Still, it was a far cry from the narrow cot in prison. Sarah wandered over to the bookshelf, crammed with well-loved paperbacks. Her gaze settled on a small, ornate box, nestled amongst the books on the top shelf. It was hers. Before her arrest in a moment of panic, she had managed to stash a few pieces of jewellery inside, a couple of rings, some earrings, a delicate chain. Her hand reached out instinctively. The box felt lighter than she remembered. Inside, nestled in the faded velvet lining, lay only her wedding band and a simple pair of silver earrings. "Oh, honey," Eleanor's apologetic voice came from behind her. "I had to sell everything else. Mostly it went on Lily." Sarah turned, her heart aching for her mother's quiet sacrifices. "Mum, you don't have to explain. You did what you had to do. But why didn't you sell these?" She gestured to the ring and earrings. Eleanor's gaze softened, a hint of tears in her eyes. "I just couldn't. This is your wedding ring, Sarah, and Ethan gave you those earrings for Lily's first birthday." Sarah sighed, a wave of sadness washing over her. "Does any of that even matter now?" "Well," Eleanor said softly, "you don't go back to that Mrs. Henderson, you hear me? No more borrowing from her. We'll manage. We have enough for Lily's field trip." The two women embraced, the older frail mother and her daughter scarred by life's harshness, finding solace in each other's arms. Yes, Sarah thought, somehow they would make things work. The next morning, Sarah's first stop was the local pawn shop. The amount she received for her remaining jewellery was less than she had hoped, but it was enough. After checking in with her parole officer, she made her way to Lily's school. She wanted to pay for the field trip herself and, more importantly, see where her daughter spent her days. It was the bustling chaos of mid-morning recess. The school hallways buzzed with the energy of hundreds of children. Kids darted through the corridors, their laughter and shouts echoing off the linoleum floors. A familiar scene, one that brought a faint smile to Sarah's lips as memories of her own childhood flooded back. It had been much the same then. She easily found Lily's classroom. A small group of children stood at the blackboard, drawing something with coloured chalk. Others huddled in noisy discussions, their voices animated. A few girls showed off new shoes to each other, their giggles filling the air. And then Sarah saw her, Lily, sitting alone at the back of the classroom, like a small, ruffled bird. She wasn't interacting with anyone, and no one seemed to be paying her any attention. But when Lily spotted Sarah standing in the doorway, her face lit up with pure joy. She jumped up from her seat and ran towards her mother, her small arms outstretched. "Mummy!" Lily cried, her voice filled with unadulterated happiness. "Are you here for me? I still have a class." "I'll wait for you," Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with love. "I'll be by the schoolyard. I just wanted to drop off the money for your school trip." The other children in the classroom had noticed the unfamiliar woman standing in the doorway. The noise level dropped, and curious eyes turned towards Sarah, studying her with a mixture of shyness and interest. A few of the girls exchanged whispers and giggles. Meanwhile, the teacher who had been grading papers at her desk also looked up, her gaze meeting Sarah's. She set aside her work and approached them. "You must be Lily's mother," the woman asked, her gaze sweeping over Sarah with a practised air of appraisal. Her expensive business suit and carefully applied makeup spoke of a world far removed from Sarah's worn clothes. "Yes," Sarah replied, meeting the woman's cool gaze with a steady nod. "I see," the teacher said, her vividly red lips pursing slightly as she openly scrutinized Sarah's simple sweater and faded jeans. "So, Sarah will be joining the field trip as well? Keep in mind there will be an additional fee." "Understood. I'll take care of it," Sarah assured her. But I do have a question. How is Lily doing in general? How are her studies? Her interactions with other children?" The teacher, Ms. Albright, offered a dismissive shrug. "Her studies is adequate. If you attend the parent-teacher conferences, you'll have a better understanding. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm rather busy." She took the offered money from Sarah's hand with the tips of her manicured fingers, as if handling something unpleasant, and carried it to her desk. After making a quick note in a ledger, she announced, her voice carrying a hint of dismissal, "You're free to go. Class is about to begin." Sarah, who had hoped for even a brief conversation about her daughter, simply nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. She leaned down to kiss Lily's cheek, a silent promise of connection, and then headed out to the schoolyard to wait. Finally Lily emerged, her bright eyes clouded with a film of tears. "What is it, honey?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "What happened? Are you all right?" "Yeah, everything's fine," Lily mumbled, avoiding her mother's gaze. "But I can see you've been crying. Did someone hurt your feelings?" Sarah gently cupped her daughter's chin, tilting her face up. Lily shook her head, her lower lip trembling before fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Between sobs she recounted how, after Sarah had left the classroom, one of the boys had started calling her Jailbird's daughter, and the other children had laughed. "And what did Miss Albright say?" Sarah's voice tightened with protective anger. "Nothing, really. She just said it was wrong to laugh at people who are miserable." "That's exactly what she said?" Sarah asked, her fists clenching at her sides. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Mummy," she whispered, her voice laced with confusion and hurt, "but we're not miserable, are we?" At 10 years old, Lily had already encountered this word directed at her. Eleanor had tried to soften its meaning, explaining it meant not having as much, but Lily sensed the underlying implication of being somehow deficient, worthless. The teacher's casual cruelty stung deeply. "No, baby girl, no. They are the ones who are miserable," Sarah whispered fiercely, a protective rage simmering beneath her calm exterior. Just then Miss Albright walked across the schoolyard. Leaving Lily sitting on a nearby bench, Sarah strode purposefully towards her. "Miss Albright," Sarah said, her voice clear and ringing with indignation, "I have a question for you." The teacher stopped, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drawn on with henna, arching in feigned surprise. "Yes?" "Why do you allow a classroom environment where children feel entitled to insult others? And why would you yourself use such a demeaning term to describe a child?" Sarah's voice remained steady, despite the tremor of her anger. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," Miss Albright returned, her tone dismissive. "Lily told me everything. How you called her miserable." "Me? Call a child miserable?" Miss Albright clutched her chest, her heavily shadowed eyelids fluttering dramatically. "That's a blatant lie. Your daughter is a very imaginative storyteller. Any child in my class would confirm that. It's precisely why she struggles to connect with her peers. And frankly, before you come here making accusations, perhaps you should get to know your own child. I understand you've been absent for several years, unable to be a consistent presence in her life, but now, for Lily's sake, I suggest you focus on her upbringing before she follows in your footsteps." The teacher's cruel words hit Sarah like a physical blow. A torrent of angry retorts surged within her, but she bit them back, the bitter taste of restraint sharp on her tongue. Lily was still a student here, and Sarah herself was newly released, her freedom fragile. She couldn't afford to escalate the situation. Yes, Sarah said slowly, her voice low but firm, each word measured. My daughter will follow in my footsteps, and she will grow up to be a decent human being. Of course, Miss Albright sneered, turning on her heel and clicking away across the pavement. Sarah turned back to Lily, her heart aching at the injustice her daughter had already faced. Sweetheart, she said, her voice soft but firm, don't you ever pay attention to what ignorant people say. You are smart, you are kind, and you are loved. And I will do everything in my power to make sure you are happy. She pulled Lily into a tight embrace, a silent promise passing between them. Later, they found themselves in a small clothing store, the racks filled with the bright colours of childhood. Sarah carefully chose a new pair of shoes for Lily, warm tights for the coming cooler weather, and a pretty skirt and blouse. The meagre funds stretched just far enough. At the bakery, Lily's eyes had lingered on a towering cake, adorned with swirls of fluffy frosting. But the croissant with cream filling in the display case was all Sarah could afford. I really do love croissant, Mummy, Lily had repeated softly, as they walked up the stairs to their apartment, her small hand clutching the brown paper bag. It's the best pastry, isn't it? Sarah forced a smile, her heart twisting slightly. Yes, my love, it's the very best. She knew Lily was trying to reassure her, to make her feel better about the cake she hadn't been able to buy. A silent vow formed in Sarah's mind. The moment she found work, the first paycheck would go towards that extravagant, cream-filled cake. But finding work was a soul-crushing endeavour. Sarah visited one establishment after another, her hopes dwindling with each polite but firm refusal. The moment her record was revealed, doors slammed shut in her face. At one company, a man had even chuckled, his eyes filled with a cruel amusement. Hiring you would be like letting a fox loose in the hen-house. The rejection stung, each one chipping away at her fragile hope. Despair began to settle in until, in a cruel twist of fate, she saw Randall. All these years, his betrayal had been a constant, bitter presence in her thoughts. She had known he was responsible for her suffering, but the reality of seeing him so unexpectedly on the street left her momentarily speechless. She had imagined this encounter countless times, rehearsing the fiery accusations she would hurl his way, but now, faced with his physical presence, she felt a wave of disorientation. Randall emerged from an expensive restaurant, the kind of place she and Ethan used to frequent, while Sarah walked slowly along the sidewalk, lost in her own weary thoughts. Their eyes met. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a smug smirk. He curled his lip in disdain and simply walked past her, as if she were a stain on the pavement. Sarah stood frozen, watching him slide into a sleek, expensive car. He glanced back at her, a look of superiority in his eyes, the gaze of a master looking at a servant. Then, with a roar of the engine, he sped away, leaving Sarah feeling as though she had been dragged through the mud. Back home, she recounted the painful encounter to Eleanor. Her mother listened, her face etched with a weary understanding, and then let out a heavy sigh. That Randall, he'll answer for this, Sarah, he will. If not in this life, then in the next. Oh, Mum, Sarah said with a sad smile. I wish it could be in this one. It just doesn't seem fair, does it? All this. No justice. She shook her head. Although, who am I kidding? I should be the last person to believe in justice, and yet a part of me still does. You just have to get through this, honey. It will pass, I promise, Eleanor said, her voice filled with the mother's unwavering conviction. It will, Sarah nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. But I have to find work. No one will hire me once they know. Maybe don't tell them, Eleanor suggested hesitantly. Sarah shrugged, a wry smile on her lips. They'll find out eventually, Mum. What's the point of lying? A new thought crossed her mind. Maybe I should look for something simpler. Maybe cleaning jobs. Oh, Sarah, honey, that's beneath you, Eleanor protested gently. Sarah knew her mother was right. With an economics degree, working as a cleaner felt like a surrender. But with each rejection, the reality of her situation became clearer. Despite the lack of any legal restrictions on her profession, her past was a wall she couldn't seem to climb. Defeated, she began to search for cleaning positions. But even there, it wasn't easy. Employers sought individuals with spotless records. Then, help came from the most unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson from apartment 3. One afternoon she stopped Sarah in the hallway. Sarah, she said, her tone surprisingly neutral, would you be interested in cleaning the hallways in a few of the buildings our company manages? Our regular cleaner, well, she's gone on a bender. And with it being autumn, the dirt is terrible. The tenants are complaining. It's been 2 days and the hallways are a mess. I need someone reliable, someone who doesn't drink. You don't drink, do you? Sarah managed a wry smile. No, Mrs. Henderson, I don't. Look, I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson said, her gaze softening slightly. She finally met Sarah's eyes. People, they have their opinions about those who've been where you've been. But I've been watching you, Sarah. You seem like a decent person. Everyone makes mistakes. So, would you want the job? We wouldn't be able to put you on the books officially. Sarah shrugged, a weary acceptance in her posture. I'll take it. What choice do I have? So, Sarah began her days scrubbing floors, the repetitive motion a stark contrast to the financial spreadsheets she had once commanded. Through her interactions with Mrs. Henderson, she came to understand that while the woman was shrewd and calculating, she honoured her word. The promised wages were paid promptly, and for that Sarah was grateful. The building management left her to her work without interference. It was the residents who presented a more varied landscape. Some passed by with indifference, their gazes sliding over her as she knelt with her bucket and mop. Others felt entitled to comment, their pronouncements on her cleaning abilities delivered with a critical edge. More than once, Sarah had to bite back the urge to retort, to suggest they try wielding the mop themselves and demonstrate their superior technique. But her precarious position demanded silence. In some of the buildings she cleaned, Sarah encountered families whose children were in Lily's class. Initially, these parents were unaware of the identity of their building's cleaner, but at a school event the recognition dawned, and their polite smiles twisted into barely concealed disdain. It wasn't long before their children, echoing the sentiments voiced at home, began to taunt Lily, snickering that her mother clearly hadn't learned to clean properly in prison. "Guess they don't teach that kind of thing behind bars," one boy sneered, the phrase delivered with a practised cruelty that suggested it had been rehearsed. It was clear the parents' prejudice had trickled down, becoming a new form of childish amusement. Lily, who had briefly found companionship with some girls after the museum trip, was once again ostracised. The label "Jailbird Cleaner's Daughter," a new barrier between her and acceptance. Once again Lily came home in tears, her small shoulders shaking with the weight of her classmates' cruelty, and once again Sarah found herself at the school, her anger simmering as she spoke to Miss Albright. The teacher, however, feigned ignorance, suggesting Lily was fabricating the incidents, her tone implying the child was inherently untrustworthy. Even a meeting with the principal yielded nothing. "We pride ourselves on our well-behaved students and experienced faculty," he stated, his tone dismissive and final. If you're dissatisfied, you are welcome to enroll Lily elsewhere. But where else could she go? This school was conveniently located, just a short bus ride, or even a walk away. The next nearest school was almost an hour's commute, a journey too long and complicated for young Lily to navigate on her own. Meanwhile, Sarah had another problem to solve. Her mother was growing increasingly frail. The surgery loomed a constant worry, but the money for it remained stubbornly out of reach. Sarah's meagre earnings vanished quickly, swallowed by Eleanor's medications and the bare necessities for Lily. Sarah herself went without, mending her old clothes, her own needs a distant afterthought. Even the promised cake remained a dream deferred. Sarah felt trapped, as if she were caught in a tightening circle of problems. Her mother's failing health, Lily's torment at school, and her own desperate struggle for acceptance and a living wage. The eve of the new year arrived, a fragile promise of hope in the cold winter air. Sarah finished her cleaning rounds a little early that evening, eager to get home. It was a holiday, after all. She wanted to create some semblance of a celebration, however modest their budget. She stopped at the grocery store, picking up ingredients for a simple salad, a small bag of tangerines and a bottle of juice. Her gaze lingered for a moment on a lavish cake, but she moved on. Eleanor had promised to bake a simple jam tart. It would have to be enough for now. Better times would come, Sarah told herself, a silent mantra against the encroaching darkness. Leaving the store, she turned down a narrow alley, a shortcut she often took. The path ran alongside a row of overflowing dumpsters. Suddenly she saw a dog, a West Highland white terrier, its head bowed low, its gaze fixed on the grimy pavement. It sat motionless, as if lost in its own canine despair. "Hey there, fella, what are you doing all alone?" Sarah said softly, stepping cautiously towards the dog. It didn't flinch, didn't even lift its head. Emboldened, Sarah reached out and gently stroked its back. The dog, startled, then slowly raised its head. Sarah saw that it was an older dog, its fur matted and dull, its eyes cloudy and watering. It had clearly been on the streets for a while. Perhaps it was sick, or simply freezing in the winter air. She noticed a worn collar around its neck. It had to be lost. Someone was likely searching for it. Sarah knew at that moment she couldn't just walk away. Sarah gently tugged on the dog's collar, coaxing him to follow. To her surprise, the animal responded with a quiet obedience, falling into step beside her. They walked the short distance to their building in comfortable silence. The moment the dog saw Lily, a spark of pure joy ignited in the little girl's eyes. For years, Lily had longed for a furry companion, a secret wish she had never dared to voice. Understanding the unspoken financial constraints of their small family, Sarah spread an old woolen shawl in a corner of the living room, and the dog settled onto it with a sigh, as if understanding this was his temporary haven. "Can you believe someone would abandon such a sweet animal?" Eleanor murmured, placing a bowl of milk nearby with a gentle hand. She, too, had always loved animals, but their cramped apartment and her relentless work schedule had never allowed for a pet. The dog, however, ignored the offering, his gaze fixed on the floor, a picture of canine dejection. "He looks like he's crying," Lily observed softly, and she was right. The dog seemed to carry a weight of sadness in his posture. Lily bravely reached out and stroked his soft fur, her small fingers gently exploring his collar. Suddenly, her touch found a hidden seam, a small, hidden pocket. Inside, nestled against the worn leather, was a tiny, folded slip of paper. "Mummy, there's a phone number in here!" Lily exclaimed, holding out the note. Sarah, who had just kicked off her worn sneakers, took the paper. "It must be the owner's number," she surmised, a sense of responsibility settling over her. "We need to call." Lily's face fell. "So, Jack won't stay with us?" "Jack?" Sarah smiled gently. "You've already named him." Eleanor knelt beside Lily, her hand resting on her granddaughter's small back. "Sweetheart, he already has a family, and they're clearly looking for him if they put this note here. But don't worry. Some day when things are a little easier, we'll definitely get you a dog of your very own." Sarah sighed inwardly, a silent reprimand to her mother for planting potentially false hope. With a determined air she dialed the number. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before a man's voice answered. Sarah explained the situation, her words carefully chosen. "Whitey? Do you have Whitey?" The man's voice erupted with relief. "Oh, thank heavens! I'm on my way. Just tell me the address." 40 minutes later, a sharp knock echoed through their small apartment. A man in his late 30s stood in the hallway, his expensive leather jacket and impeccably pressed shoes a stark contrast to their humble dwelling. Despite his polished appearance, his eyes held a frantic, worried look. "Where is he?" the man exclaimed, then, catching himself, added with a flustered smile, "Oh, excuse me, hello." At the sound of his voice, the dog, who had remained despondent on the shawl, suddenly perked up. He whined, a high-pitched sound of recognition, and scrambled towards the door. He reached the man, rising onto his hind legs, his front paws landing gently on the man's chest, his head nuzzling into his neck. The man embraced him tightly, a wide, joyful smile spreading across his face, and Sarah thought she even saw the glint of tears in the corners of his eyes. "We've been searching for him for a week. My wife was walking him, and he bolted, chasing after a cat, I think. He's never done that before. Whitey isn't just a dog, he's family." Eleanor, Sarah and Lily simply nodded, their hearts warmed by the reunion. The man, after offering profuse thanks, turned to leave, Wiley trotting eagerly by his side. "Oh, wait, I almost forgot," the man exclaimed, slapping his forehead. "Please, take this as a token of our gratitude." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick wad of bills. Though the temptation was undeniably strong, Sarah shook her head with quiet dignity. "No, thank you. I didn't take in your Whitey for money. He was freezing out there. Besides," she added with a small smile, "the gratitude is all the payment we need." "Please," the man insisted, his hand still outstretched. "No, thank you," Sarah repeated firmly. "Just please be more careful with your friend in the future." The man shrugged, offered another heartfelt thanks, and then he and Whitey were gone. "We should have taken the money," Eleanor murmured, a practical concern in her voice. "Mum," Sarah exclaimed gently, "didn't you always teach me that kindness doesn't require payment?" Eleanor sighed, a reluctant agreement in her eyes. Lily, however, remained quiet, a lingering sadness in her expression. Why had Mummy called? Whitey could have been their dog. Soon the flurry of pre-New Year preparations filled their small apartment. The table was set, a modest but festive spread, and the clock on the wall ticked towards midnight. The three women were just settling down to eat when a sudden knock echoed through the quiet apartment. Sarah, wondering who could be visiting, went to open the door. Standing in the doorway was the familiar figure of the man with Whitey, accompanied by another man holding two heavy-looking shopping bags. The first man also held a basket overflowing with vibrant fruit and a magnificent cake. "Hello again," he said, a touch of embarrassment colouring his cheeks. "I still can't get over your kindness. I really must thank you properly." and with that he stepped inside. Sarah instinctively took a step back, surprised by his persistence. The second man followed him in, deposited the bags by the wall, and then quietly slipped back out. The first man remained. "Whitey!" Lily squealed, her face lighting up at the sight of her new-found friend. She rushed over and threw her arms around the dog, who, now clearly back to his old, happy self, enthusiastically licked her nose. The man then presented the elaborate cake to Sarah. "Won't you come in?" Sarah offered hesitantly, and the man readily accepted. Finally, he introduced himself. His name was Daniel. He briefly explained the circumstances of Whitey's disappearance. The culprit was a woman with whom he had been living and who wanted to marry him. Daniel's wife and daughter had tragically died in a mountain accident years ago, and Whitey, his daughter's beloved companion, held immense sentimental value. His new girlfriend, however, had disliked the dog and had simply abandoned him, lying to Daniel that Whitey had run away. She hadn't known about the hidden pocket on his collar. When Daniel had returned home with Whitey, she had thrown a fit, declaring she wouldn't tolerate the animal in the house. One argument led to another, and she finally confessed to driving Whitey to the other side of the city and pushing him out of the car. Daniel, upon hearing her callous confession, had promptly kicked her out. So there he was, alone with Whitey on New Year's Eve. He then remembered the kind woman who had helped find his cherished dog, and felt a pang of guilt for not expressing his gratitude more adequately. "Well," Sarah said, shaking off her surprise, "let's celebrate the new year. It's almost midnight." That New Year's Eve was magical. Lily was in absolute heaven, surrounded by delicious food, including the coveted cream-filled cake. She eventually fell asleep at the table, her face smudged with frosting and happiness. Sarah carried her to bed, turning down the volume on the television. Later, as Eleanor began to nod off in her armchair, Sarah and Daniel moved to the kitchen, the quiet intimacy of the small space fostering an unexpected connection. Whitey slept soundly in the hallway, right beside Daniel's polished shoes. Sarah found herself feeling surprisingly comfortable and at ease in Daniel's company. It wasn't just the gifts. He was a genuinely kind and engaging conversationalist. She also learned that Daniel was a successful businessman, a detail he mentioned almost as an afterthought. After the new year, life for Sarah and her family took a dramatic turn for the better. First, Daniel offered Sarah a job at his company. He wasn't deterred by her past, having heard whispers of her case and harbouring his own doubts about her guilt. Second, Daniel arranged for Eleanor to receive the best medical care, ensuring she could finally have her much-needed heart surgery. And third, Daniel Wesley, it turned out, was a generous benefactor to Lily's school. When Lily confided in him about the bullying and the teacher's dismissive attitude, he didn't hesitate. One day, he simply walked into the school with Lily by his side. The sight of the wealthy Mr. Wesley, a respected figure in the community, walking hand in hand with the daughter of the cleaning lady ex-con, sent ripples of shock through the school, silencing even the principal and Miss Albright. "Oh, Mr. Wesley, what a pleasant surprise!" the principal fawned. "We're so delighted to see you. And Lily, what a lovely girl!" Miss Albright echoed, her smile suddenly wide and insincere. Daniel's expression remained cool. "I'm just here to collect Lily's records. Her mother is currently busy with reports at my head office, and her grandmother is undergoing medical treatment. Will you please release her documents?" Of course," the principal stammered. "But is Lily leaving? We have such an excellent school here." "We've found a better fit," Daniel replied simply, and just like that, Lily's difficult chapter at that school came to an end. But Sarah's story didn't end there. Daniel hired a top-notch lawyer who successfully reopened Sarah's case, meticulously uncovering the evidence that finally exposed Randall's guilt. He was arrested and ultimately convicted, finally facing the consequences of his actions. Sarah's conviction was overturned, her record cleared, and she received a substantial compensation for the years of injustice she had endured. And in her personal life, everything blossomed. Sarah and Daniel fell deeply in love and were married. Now, Lily, with the proud air of a little hostess, walked Whitey every day. And slowly, with the gentle passage of time and the healing power of love, the hurts and losses in their big and small hearts began to mend.